Thanks for tuning in to Stay Sharp with Razorleaf, your secret weapon for all things digital and manufacturing. Today's episode is about how integration is key to better information across the organization. When integration is done right, it unlocks efficiencies and helps people do their job better. Tim Noce, Razorleaf's Vice President of Products, chats with Jonathan Scott and Jen Forello about the inherent challenges around integration and why it is often an afterthought in many business system strategies. And now I'll hand it off to our Razorleaf team. Thanks for tuning in.
Welcome to this week's Stay Sharp with Razorleaf, where we're discussing all things digital in the context of products and manufacturing. I am joined, as always, by my colleague, Jonathan Scott.
Hi, everybody.
In one of our previous podcasts, we had walked through a seemingly endless list of business systems available to manufacturing organizations as they go through the life cycle of a product, from design and development to production to end of life, and all of the data that's stored in those systems. But we all know that information is only valuable if you can actually access it. So this week, we're going to talk a little bit about integrations and how to make that data flow from one system to another and the importance of that. To help us with that topic, we have a special guest, Tim Noce, our VP of Product here at Razorleaf, who lives, eats, and breathes this topic every day. Tim, would you like to take a couple minutes to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Jen. I'm excited to be here with you. I've been with Razorleaf about a little over 10 years now. My responsibilities here are to oversee our product development, the processes, and the projects involving integration. I have a long background in a variety of markets and industries and technologies, starting with systems infrastructure for about a decade back, way back in the 90s. I'll try not to date myself too much. And then moving on into software development and database administration for another decade before joining Razorleaf. So I've been dealing with system integration topics for a long, long time, back in the old days where it was a very difficult task, up to now where we have some nice modern tools and interfaces and ways of getting data from any kind of a source system to a destination system. So looking forward to the conversation.
That's quite a background, Tim, and I think you bring a lot of perspective to this that comes from all kinds of places. Like Jen mentioned at the beginning, getting into this topic today, integration as a subject is kind of a holistic thing across lots of parts of a business. And we did talk about business systems and all the things that you might need related to making products in a different podcast episode. But I think drawing on that a little bit, you bring that background of seeing lots of different industries and different perspectives on the IT world that's so critical to integration. So I think it's worth digging into, why this topic matters a little bit, and how do we draw from the kind of expertise you have as we talk about the subject and think about all the angles on this, right? When we were talking about business systems previously, it was about how you get the job done in a company of making and selling a product. And you need a bunch of different functions and processes and systems to do that. But how do you keep kind of a common view across that? How do you keep the thread? Not to overuse the buzzword digital thread, but that's certainly something we're talking about here when we're thinking about integrating business systems, integrating data, because we want to keep the thread as we move from step to step or process to process. But there's lots of challenges with that. Like, that's not simple to do. And I'm hoping today we can dig into some of that. You can give us some of your insight on, what are those problems and how do we solve them with integration? I know I think about just the simple thing I mentioned of moving from one system to another. Do you lose the thread? Do you lose the data? Are you still talking about the same piece of information? And what are the things that just accidentally you lose? And what are the things that, maybe intentionally you lose? There are all sorts of pieces of this that we need to dig into.
Jonathan, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a great lead in. And it's a particularly interesting topic with regards to manufacturing, where integration is probably more critical than it is in a general business sense between between an accounting system and a BI system to do reporting. There's a lot of opportunity in manufacturing to improve product, improve processes, get feedback, from the users of your products that drive change and create that digital thread, right? So integration at all points throughout the process is kind of critical, especially as we start to consider the systems involved, the cloud, using best-in-class systems instead of a monolithic type solution. There are a lot of topics here that we could cover, and I hope we get into some of those today.
Yeah, you mentioned a really interesting one, Tim, about the reason for this, the motivation behind it, right? That in manufacturing, there are a lot of opportunities to connect maybe parts of the business or functions of the business that aren't typically connected. And just thinking about the industry for the last, I don't know how many decades, so many of these have popped up, right? Like this concept of design for manufacturing or design for sustainability, or, you're sort of picking other functions within the business that relate to the definition of a product that you might be making, that maybe you don't have all the information you need at that other stage. And the answer is maybe integration, right? Because you've got information in one system that might inform the process being performed at another stage. And that one's a great example that you just brought up, right? Where there's huge opportunity maybe to improve things through this type of activity.
When you look at shortened product life cycles, the rapid evolution of products today, as opposed to what might have happened 20 or 30 years ago, where you create a product and it lasts for 10, 15 years, the data changes, right? And that's where it becomes very critical to move information more quickly, to have access to data in real time, to make sure that you're securing that data, to using it in appropriate fashions and creating that stream of information, getting the data to the people that need to consume it as they need to consume it.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? Speed matters here. Speed makes this harder, but it also makes it more important, which is why integration is such a hot topic, right? It's a good reason for us to be talking about it today. We know it can improve how manufacturers make products and what they do, but you're adding in that extra constraint of, we can't be lazy about it. We have to get after this because speed means you have to do it and you have to do it well.
Speed's critical to innovation. And so, in today's world, we have to turn these designs. We have to create new things. We have to satisfy that consumer demand. And you can't innovate without having that data, having the speed of data exchange, of information, that flow that is critical to everybody in the process.
Right, where it might have been okay years ago to say, oh, that's okay, I'll go get that out of that other system, or I'll wait for my coworker to bring me that information to act on it. To your point, now you need to know it, you need to see it. Maybe it even needs to be real time.
And I think it is important that it be real time, because it's not just the speed of the decisions that you want to be making, but you want to be making better decisions. So you need to know that you have the most accurate data when you're going to be making a decision. If you're moving that quick, if you're moving that quickly, it's like driving down a highway and just a small touch of the wheel can take you into the other car if you're not paying attention.
That's right. And we are, we're feeding real-time information from electronic devices embedded in all kinds of different systems, right? That's a whole IoT topic we could probably get to in another podcast. Maybe we'll touch on it here a little, but at least near real time. And the way the supply chain works, not only the systems, but the supply chain. You're not going to wait for a company to design you something, a component that's going to be used in your product. You're not going to wait 6 months for that. You got to get that design done early. You've got to get it integrated into your designs. You've got to start planning procurement and planning manufacturing, and all of that has to happen in a tighter cycle than it ever has before.
The point that we're digging into actually, I think, is going to lead us into some things I really want to ask about related to strategy here in a minute. But that point about speed and operating with information reminds me of all kinds of challenges around integration that I've seen in the past, like data duplication, right? So, I've got something I need to work with certain information. Let's say it's, it's like the cost of a part, and that's going to inform what I do in engineering and design. So I record the cost of the part in maybe my design systems so I can make those decisions. But if I record it there and it also lives in another system like ERP or a supply chain system, like you were just talking about, Tim, then it could be out of date and I'm operating with bad information. And it gets back to this speed issue, right? Of, wow, there's a lot of angles on this. If you've got duplicate data or you go about, I'll say, integrating wrong or integrating poorly, then you could be making fast decisions on bad information. So it seems like to me this world is sort of wrought with good ideas and good intentions of getting the right information to the right people. But if you don't do it in the right way, you could still be creating problems, right? You're operating too quickly on some information that's out of date and you don't realize it.
Agreed. And the data silo problem that we had in decades past, we've always dealt with this, right? We've had these data silos. People are storing their data for their job in their system or in their Excel spreadsheet or in their Access database or wherever that was, creating silos of data. And IT for the last few decades has been trying to solve this problem of exchange, of getting data out of these silos and combining it into data warehouses and data marts and all these types of things. But in today's world, that's not enough because these silos have grown. They're not silos of Excel spreadsheets or databases on the desktop anymore or data in a particular system. They're data that's on the internet in a best of breed CRM solution or in an internet-based ERP system. So the cloud has really expanded this problem in that you no longer have to have full IT control over an environment, over the source of the data, and you no longer can solve that using data marts, data warehouses, or big monolithic systems that try and do everything for your publishers and consumers of data.
So what you're getting at there, Tim, right, is that the problem continues to expand and it's sprawling in terms of where the data is. Even as we try to solve it, right, it's just the problem keeps getting harder.
Sure. So that's the bad news side, right? Oh, and I haven't even gotten into the security side of this, right? So,
that was my next question is if it's getting that big, security is going to be a challenge.
Right. We have the issues with rekeying data and mistakes and data being all over the place. The security side of this is complicated too, in that the way we did things is really problematic. The way we do things, we're not there yet. So getting a product definition that might contain intellectual property and emailing that to somebody, that's quite insecure. And these are the things that are happening. Taking data that is from a secured system like a PLM system or an ERP system and exporting it into an Excel spreadsheet to share with people. Now you lose that. You lose the control over the data that's in that spreadsheet. And you rely on people that aren't security experts to exchange that data appropriately. And that's a challenge. And so automation becomes critical. When you're looking at integration, making sure that you automate these processes so that you have full end-to-end integration, that the automation controls the access to the data, provides it at the right person, at the right place, the right time.
Tim, that's a great point. I mean, I guess I hadn't really thought of it that way, that we do a lot with these business systems to protect the data in them and make sure we got the right access inside our company, right? And we even protect some of these business systems so that people outside aren't accessing it. And then we know, though, that we need to collaborate. We need to share data among systems or even outside of the walls of our organization. But when we do, we don't think about how do we protect the data always, right? And so in a lot of ways, this topic of integration is about how do you protect data when it moves from place to place? If you don't think about it, then you don't do it because you put it in the hands of users, right? And I know I'm a user. I'm dangerous. I share stuff via email all the time that I maybe I shouldn't, right? And we think about it. We have data control policies and that sort of thing. But the safest way would be to let a system handle the security and, control how the data, how it's secured when it's between systems. And that's really what you're getting at, right?
And I don't even think it's just controlling the data. It's controlling what sliver of the data they have access to. Because a lot of times when you share data, you share much more than your receiving party needs. But if the integration is actually set up so that it only pulls and is only allowed to pull the little bits of data that they need. We used to have this in data translation all the time is, you're transferring a huge 3D model, and all I really needed was the mating between two different pieces. But if that huge model transferred over, they now have all of the IP, they've got, all they needed was that mating.
No, that's exactly right. Well, I've seen that plenty, Jen, in all kinds of cases, right? That issue of IP leakage due to it's just hard to move the data. Oh, so we move a big package of the data because I don't want to dig inside and see what's inside it, or I don't know how to dig inside and see what's inside it. So I just send them everything because what I don't want to do is slow down. Comes back to that speed issue, right? I just need to share this with somebody. We just need to work on it together, and we're quick. And when we're quick, we can be sloppy, and sloppy can be dangerous.
Yeah, so I think we're doing a pretty good job defining the problem here, right? And it may seem insurmountable right now based on what we've just laid out. There are a lot of facets to making sure that your data moves to the appropriate people, that it's secure, that it's done in near real time or at least just in time fashion so that your consumers of the data have it when they need it.
Having gone through all of the challenges and why we need to do this and what it's more about, okay, so how do we solve those challenges then? What is the best way to integrate the different platforms, different business systems, to address the data duplication, to address the security issues, to provide real-time access or just-in-time access? What are some strategies there?
I think there's good news here, Jen. And first off, I'll tell you, it's not insurmountable. The tools are available to do it. The expertise is out there to do it. The technology changes we've seen, even in the last few years, for the last couple of decades for sure, but even over the last few years as cloud has driven technological change, have opened up the doors to make this a reality. And so it's not insurmountable. There are the processes and tools and mechanisms in place to check off each one of these challenges as you're laying out your integration project.
Well, one thing I was going to add in here is so much of my background is in 3D data translation. And I've always defined it as I love it. It's like a perfect engineering problem because at any one point in time, it's imminently solvable. But the inputs are always changing. So it's never done solving it. So it's a perfect engineering problem. You can solve it, but it's constantly changing. So you're constantly engaged in it. And I feel like integrating different business platforms is the same thing. It's an interoperability problem, but it's also, as Tim's talking about, all the different things that are changing, whether it's technology or moving to the cloud or IoT, et cetera, it will constantly be changing and constantly growing in importance. So
that's a great point, Jen. And those changes, they're not only at system level, right? It's the changing of the data, the changing of the, changing of information, right? This is all about information in real time. And I think we can lay out appropriate strategies for making all of this a much easier problem to solve than it sounded by how we were laying out all the different facets and challenges that you face when looking into this.
That's right. We can make this hard, right, Tim? I mean, that's what it sounded like a minute ago. But to your point, we can also make it simple by starting with what are the basics and building up from there.
That's right. And it starts with having a strategy, right? And I think we're starting to see this more and more in the manufacturing space. Integration used to be a secondary thought. I've put my PLM system in place and I put my ERP system in place, and now I want this guy to stop rekeying all the data between the two, right? As every product's released, I'm going to key in materials and bombs and anything else into ERP from the information out of PLM off of the spreadsheet that was sent to me, right? So that was the way it was done for years. And then we got to, we don't have to, have access to both systems. Maybe we exchange an Excel file or do some of those kinds of things. But it goes beyond that. When you have an effective strategy and you look at your end-to-end process, what system domains need to store what information, and what of that information is critical to the rest of the team throughout the process those people that might not have access to the source system or the system of truth for that data. Then you can lay out all of those threads, all of those work streams and processes, and you can come up with a comprehensive integration strategy and solve this problem. I want to say easily. It's not that easy, but it is definitely solvable.
So let me restate what I'm hearing you say, Tim, and I think it makes a lot of sense, is you have to look at the problem from multiple perspectives. You have to look at it holistically, strategically, get your 50,000 foot view. What are we trying to do to make a product here, and who are all the different people and the different functions involved? And think about it end to end, right? That's what digital thread teaches us, is think about the thread overall. But then you also have to go look at it with, well, what do I have? What are my building blocks? What systems am I using? What data exists in what systems? Who has access to what, when? When does it happen in the life cycle? When does that data come into existence? That kind of thing. And you have to kind of work the problem from both sides, knowing what you've got and what you want. Is that what you're getting at?
That's exactly what I'm saying, Jonathan. If you have a solid strategy, then you can incorporate the tactics, tools, resources, people to implement against that strategy. If you don't, you run a risk of building something that doesn't contribute to the whole. So we've worked on projects where there have been plenty of integrations done, going back even years or decades. And they're so embedded, point-to-point type operations, sharing small pieces of data between two systems, when there's a third person, a third party, and a third system that needs that data.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of, Tim. When you said that, I was like, I remember early days of integration when things are simple, that you just think about, how do I get data from here to there? And you're not looking at the big picture.
And without that big picture, without that strategy, you end up with a lot of different touch points, different integration points that make it difficult to maintain over time as the business grows. And when you can't maintain your data flows, when you don't have a cohesive strategy across all systems, you end up slowing innovation because the system changes and the things that are bound to occur, upgrades and updates and new roles and new information coming on, it's very difficult to change those. And so the strategy is critical.
You said something a minute ago, Tim. Words started flashing in my mind, talking about paying attention to the data from all the different areas and the strategy of how it needs to go together. And that challenge we used to experience with, like, well, it was over here and I moved it over there and I had a point-to-point solution, and that doesn't work in the long term. The term that was flashing in my mind is data governance, right? How important it is to understand what data comes from where, when, and where it should live, and then where it needs to be used. Who's a consumer of it downstream? And if you don't have a picture of that, how do you have this strategy, right? And I think that's some of what you're getting at there, is thinking about that strategically is key to making this all work efficiently. Is that true?
That is true, Jonathan. And again, I'm a data guy at heart, right? I was a DBA in the past, so I love the data topic, but it's even beyond that, right? You've got your data schemas that you're defining in these systems, and you've got your governance of the data. And as you're exchanging data, you need to have some governance over that and consider the implications of moving that data and those kind of things. And now we're getting into more advanced topics like ontology, data ontology, which is an expanding area. For those that don't know ontology, it's a more philosophical concept. I think it goes back to Socrates or somebody. It's been around forever, but it's the meaning of things, right? It's the what is, and that's critical to product manufacturing moving forward. To be able to describe what that data is, as that data is no longer just type keyed in information. Now it's 3D models, and it's simulation data, and it's usage data. It's performance of the product in field. It's all of these different shapes and types of data coming together. You've got to be able to describe those, come up with a method of linking all that data and figuring out how the consumer needs to see that, and then building the data schemas, structures, governance that go along with that ontology to deliver the information to that consumer at the time they need to consume it.
You got deep on us there, Tim. But I mean, I think, I get exactly what you're talking about. Even just to make it basic, to make it really simple, you have to have the same definition for words you use when you're talking about the data. Like a great example is part. We have this problem all the time, right? Like, oh yeah, I'm talking about a part. I need to integrate these two systems to share the attributes of a part. Okay, well, you talk to a CAD designer and a part is maybe a 3D model that of I'll say a discrete physical thing. Okay, but then you go talk to somebody in supply chain about a part, and they're thinking about an entry and a bill of material. Somebody else in the organization, you say part, and they've got a different connotation. And it's like, well, okay, if we all mean different things by it, and sometimes those conflict, how in the world are we ever going to share data, right? And that's the basis of this whole integration topic. So your point about ontologies makes perfect sense, but it's a simple problem that gets really complicated the more data types we talk about and the more uses and consumers and purposes of the data and all that stuff.
Absolutely, Jonathan. And between about 2000 and 2010, maybe into 2015, in this industry and other industries, we tried to do things like standardize, have the Rosetta Stone of what a part is. Right. And we've had customers that take 6 months to define what a part is, and they still come up with 23 variations. So data means different things to different people. And those structures in that ontology is critical to understanding what you have and how you can consume it in order to properly represent that information to the decision makers, to the people, to the designers, to the people making changes, to the people planning future products. You have to put all these pieces together.
Yeah, your point there is you've got a lot of stakeholders in this kind of activity of trying to bring everything together and get that holistic view and that strategy. But the first thing those folks have to do is be speaking the same language, right? They have to understand each other, understand what they're talking about before they can agree on, well, what is the strategy? What are we trying to accomplish? And how do we tie A to B to get that done?
That's right. And as consultants and IT professionals and product developers, we have to take into account that those data schemas, that the data is different, that the data schemas are different, and that the consumption model for those who need the data is different. And when you do all that and you take all that into account as part of the strategy, then you can start building models that are not relational we tried to stuff all this into relational databases for a few decades, right? But this information is stored in different structures, different formats. It can't be done anymore. So once you have all these pieces, then you can take them and make connections between the loosely related information using modern APIs and services and technologies and tools that exist in the marketplace today.
And your point there, Tim, is that, we've got this rich vocabulary of IT tools now to do all kinds of things with, right? To represent loose relationships, tight relationships, hard constraints, all those kinds of things with various tech, right? Relational databases, graph databases, REST APIs, all these things. But the question is, do you understand the information model so you can map the right tools to the right problem, right? That's what you're getting at?
That's exactly what I'm getting at. And we have the tools to do things that we've never been able to do in manufacturing before, like take a material change or a source change for a material and have that material's physical properties differ from the first batch we procured and not need keyed data to find out how that will impact the design, for example, in the next run. So we're able to look into CAD, into simulation, into objects, into video, into audio, into all of these different formats that without extracting data out of them and make these connections between this information in order to deliver data in the way that can impact decision making.
So let me ask a question then real quick. There's been a lot of talk in the industry for years about single source of truth. And we've just talked about a number of different business systems business platforms, tools, et cetera, that all hold different amounts of data, different types of data. It seems like from what you're describing, the information model, which is basically how it all interrelates, that rather than any particular system or tool, that information model would be the single source of truth. And it will be different for every company and every product.
That is great insight, Jen. Do you want a job as a product manager? Because you're thinking along the right track there, right? So where the information exists is less important. In fact, we're creating more single systems of truth. For a lot of years, we tried to have one single source of truth. We took data and we stuffed it into monolithic systems or into data warehouses and tried to reduce the number of domains where data was stored. And now we've accepted the fact that data is everywhere. And even beyond product data, user data, right? Who is your consumer? And what are they looking for? Well, that's kind of an important piece when you want to deliver something to them, right? And it's becoming more and more important. So those individual data silos or information silos, they're increasing in number, and you need the integration, the automation, the integration to piece all that together to deliver information appropriately.
Yeah, that makes sense, Tim. And I think we talked about one of the things you have to do to try and solve this problem is look at it from both ends. Can we dig deeper on that, right? We know there's an importance of looking at what assets do you have tactically, where are you at? How many of these systems do you have to deal with and pieces of data in different places? But then also looking at it strategically from the top-down view. What do I want to accomplish overall? What are my flows and processes? And maybe the mapping between those two things, the down at the ground level view and the 50,000-foot view. But all right, let's say I've got all that. Where do I go next? How do I approach this problem? Is there some recipe or cookbook I go through? Or how do you look at it when we're approaching this problem for customers?
That's a great question, Jonathan. So let me start with a real positive message. First off, it's important to know that you will have access to all this data. In today's world, when data is stored, some sort of interface to that data is provided. There are ways to do it. I have the benefit of telling every potential customer I talk to, yes, we can get to the information you need. Whether that's stored on premise in a database or on a system or a file system or cloud, yes, we can get to it. The providers make sure that your data is available to you.
Yeah, which is a new answer, by the way, right? Like 20 years ago, sometimes it was like, well, I'm sorry, the vendor of that software has locked up your data and you'll never see it again except through the UI.
Yeah, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe, Jonathan. But things have changed. It's a problem that is not insurmountable. So number one, we can get to the data. So that's important to know. And it's important to understand that if you can get to the information you need, then you just need to engage in a project with the appropriate stakeholders to lay out what that thread of information looks like. Who needs access to what, when, right? And incorporating all those security aspects, looking at what the types of information they need, those kind of things. We tend to call that a discovery, right? And you sit down, you go through this discovery process where you're building that strategy and identifying the source of truth for each type of data. You'll find out that you have duplicate systems that are storing data, and you have to make some decisions on which data is the system of truth, or which system is the system of truth for that data. And once you lay all that out and you build your architectural map and your flows, then you can go pick a tool, start interfacing with these systems, and start building the recipe to make the data flow at the appropriate point in times.
So it's about getting the right people in the room, making sure everybody's on the same page about what you're trying to accomplish maybe, and that they're all speaking the same language so that you can get down these requirements. That's what you're talking about in discovery?
It is. And it's important. We see a lot of systems where that step is skipped. We see a lot of customers where that step has been skipped. And
ready, fire, aim.
And this is not new, right? This is not isolated to this integration topic either. We tend to do that. We want to move fast, right? But I can tell you, if you have a cohesive strategy, then you lay the foundation for any type of information you need to gather, any type of change that might occur to your business. You can incorporate that into that strategy and achieve your goals.
So with discovery, you got everybody aligned on strategy. Everybody's on the same page, and you've talked about what you're actually trying to integrate enough that you've driven out some requirements that says, look, this is what I'm trying to move from system A to B or to the hub and share out to other systems. And you're starting to get clear on what the objective is. Okay, so if discovery helps you get clear and aligned on those requirements, now what? Where do you take it from there in terms of building out an integration?
That's a great question. And so, step two, once you're through that discovery process and you've got the strategy defined, you've got your architecture in place, you've got an understanding and agreement from all the stakeholders on what what the overall goal is, then it's a matter of selecting the appropriate tools, of defining the detailed pieces of the integrations, right? How do I connect to a particular system? What data is in that system, down to even the data attribute level, right? What information is needed by what role that you've defined in discovery, right?
So down to design at that point is what you're talking about, right? Actually designing the solution. Okay.
It is. You get into that design phase, and this kind of mirrors what software development is like, right? So you do your planning up front, and you get all your stakeholders, and you figure out what you want to do. Once you're done with that, then you get into all right, how are we going to do this? And that's where you drive out the details of how it's going to occur, from tool selection to very minute or very focused selection of data.
This is when you really have to get into the weeds, right? You have to have data mapping tables and, what is the size of this field and what kind of data does it hold and that kind of thing. And, it's going to move to there. And this is the tool in the API. That's what we're talking about at this point, getting down in those weeds?
That's what we're talking about. And you build that specification based on those conversations, that discussion, and looking at the capabilities of each system, looking at the roles of the consumers of that data and what information they need. You look at the when do they need it, right? Is it something that needs to be delivered in just in time or in real time or once a month? That's kind of critical. You look at how you're going to secure that data and make sure that you're only providing the appropriate data to that consumer. And those are the types of things that you lay out during that design phase.
This feels like that could be a little bit iterative at times. I mean, am I reading that right? That you might find as you're working the details of the design that some new constraint comes up or something that's going to change how you think about this strategically. Like, we can only get that data daily at the end of the day. Oh, hold on, but we need it at a different time. So let's take a different approach. I mean, does it iterate like that?
It can. Hopefully not back to the strategy. Hopefully at the end of discovery, you have a good strategy. But iteration is part of this. There's no doubt. And it's going to happen one way or the other. Either you plan for it, and as you're building out the design and detail and types of things as additional information comes forward, you can iterate on that design. Or you implement something and then you find out it doesn't work when you get to UAT or production, right? And that's what you want to avoid, is that late stage iteration. You prefer to have that iteration in the discovery design phase, not in the testing deployment phase. And so that's the challenge to all the consultants, developers, and IT folks, to make sure that they move those conversations up and they spend that time needed in discovery and design in order to deliver an appropriate long-term solution. This is that old 80-20 rule, Jonathan, right? You can spend 20% in design and 80%, messing around with it during deployment, or you can spend 80% of your time in discovery design and have an easy integration.
So there's a lot of similarity here from what I'm hearing to business system deployment. Right. We do, of course, a lot of work, a lot of different areas helping people with these product digitalization technologies. But the integration topic seems like it needs to follow a similar path, that you've got to have a strategy. You got to make a detailed plan. You're going to go execute on it. Then you're going to test it. and do all those things before you try and roll it out and introduce it to people. But that can be iterative, and you have to be aware of it, and you have to keep best practices in mind as you go through it. But this sounds like a similar pattern, and we just have to give all these steps their due in the process.
It really is. And if you look at integration as a system, I think those systems methodologies that we've used in the past for enterprise systems deployment, they all come into play in a similar fashion. So I think you're right on the button there. And it just needs to be approached as this is another enterprise system. In fact, it's kind of an important enterprise system when you think about it, since it's moving data between all your other enterprise systems, or
right. It's the one in the middle of everything, so it's maybe more critical.
That's right. So I think it's important to give it that early thought and make sure that the stakeholders are involved, that you're not just solving point solutions as they come up, but you have an overall strategy and plan.
So I'm curious, Tim, given all of this, without naming names, do you have an example that you can share with us as far as what a successful integration looks like, what it allowed a customer or manufacturing organization to do or to achieve that they were not able to do previous to that?
Let me give you a real-life example of one of our customers that had multiple enterprise systems that needed to be interconnected. They have a CRM system that contains all of the opportunity and project information and requirements for the design of a product stored in their CRM environment. And that's sitting on the cloud in a major cloud platform.
So what you're saying, Tim, is they do like project-based work, right? So their CRM really holds a lot about what it is they're going to make in terms of a product. So that's kind of the front end of their process.
That's right. So all the requirements are there, and they need to get that to design engineering. And design engineering primarily works out of a PLM system, product lifecycle management. So when the opportunity closed in CRM, instead of setting up meetings or trying to figure out how to email people the information about what was needed, that information flowed automatically, and the design engineering team can start using that through a project that was automatically created in PLM.
Right. So we didn't have to make the engineers expert CRM users, right? The data moved instead of the people having to access another system.
That's right. They had the opportunity to stay within their domain using the system that they know, as did the salespeople. So there was no cross-training, no third mechanism for information flow, emailing, Excel spreadsheets around, those kind of things. So they all went away.
No data loss, no time loss.
No data loss, no time loss, almost instantaneous. So near real time. Once the design engineers are done with that design phase on the product, all of that design information need to be passed downstream farther to an enterprise resource planning system.
Right, so they could execute, right? So as that design matured, they needed people over using ERP to sort of start taking action so they could start processing the order and actually building the thing, right?
That's right. So design planners worked in PLM, but the manufacturing planners all worked in ERP. And so you need replicas of those parts and those BOMs, and sometimes specifications or CAD. You need instructions on materials and details of materials and all those kind of things in ERP. And so that data that was being used to do in the design phase got automatically pushed into ERP again, so that those planners and those procurement people could begin their job almost instantaneous as each product piece or product component was released.
So it's another lag place, right, where we're avoiding lag, just like Jen was asking about a minute ago. If you look at their overall process of, say, order to cash, order is happening up front in CRM, understanding what you need. You've got a design step in the middle, and then at the end, you've got to go build it, deliver it, and take payment for it, right, getting to cash at the end. But what they needed was to streamline that whole flow because it was kind of happening in 3 chunks. That's what you're talking about?
That is what I'm talking about. And that PLM to ERP exchange is an area we see a lot. That's an important one because it really eliminates one of the biggest problems we see in manufacturing today, and that is design engineers don't spend enough time designing product. They spend time communicating their designs of products to other people. And with automation and integration, a lot of that goes away. So they're not being asked for the latest rev of this, or can you send me the BOM for that at this version? That goes away because the integration takes care of that, puts the data in the system that the manufacturing planners use.
Tim, that's deep. I heard something really deep there, right? Which is when you look at different functions in an organization and you're not happy with how much time they're spending communicating with other stakeholders, other functions in the business, maybe it has everything to do with integration, right? So if their data could be shared to the appropriate places so that other people could access it, and the systems could shape it in the right way so that those other stakeholders, it's in the format they need to understand, you save people a lot of time trying to communicate with other functions inside the organization. I mean, that's what you're talking about, right?
I think that's great insight. And I promise design engineering did not pay me and is not taking me golfing to say that. No, they went to school to do something very specific and they want to do it, right? And when you look at those roles within an organization, whether it's design engineering or somebody else, you want them to be as efficient and focused and grow their skill set. And when you give them these secondary or tertiary non-value added types of tasks to do, it impacts everybody.
Yeah, speaking as an engineer, I totally agree. Talking to people is non-value added.
Well, but it's funny because I also heard something that I hadn't really considered before about integrations, and it's not just, the design engineer's time, but it's, if you look at each function, it's allowing them to just focus on the things that they need to do and the tools that they need to do them in, right? So I think, Tim, you had mentioned the design engineers didn't have to become CRM experts. Well, neither did the CRM experts have to know really anything about PLM, or the ERP experts know anything about PLM. They just got the data that they needed when they needed it, how they needed it. So
that's right. And whether it's somebody on the shop floor or in manufacturing planning, or they shouldn't have to access everybody else's systems. They shouldn't have. That's an expensive proposition to go train everybody on everybody else's systems and roles. Integration solves that problem.
Well, and if you're only using a system part-time, you're training every time you touch that system. As a salesperson, I can use CRM perfectly well, but if I'm only touching PLM every so often, then I have to relearn that every time. So that's definitely an inefficiency.
Yeah, it's like the opposite of specialization, right? We all have to learn everything to do all jobs, right? It doesn't make any sense. So, yeah, I think it is touching on an important point there.
On that deep insight, thank you both, Jonathan and Tim, for that.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. This was really good.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Jonathan. It was a pleasure having this discussion. I have a whole lot more to talk about that we didn't get to, so maybe in a future podcast we can do that.
We will be happy to have you back.
Thank you for listening today. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. This is your podcast as much as it is ours, and we welcome your feedback and ideas on what topics you'd like to see our team cover in a future broadcast. Please share your thoughts and questions with us by sending an email to podcast@razorleaf.com, and we will share your comments on a future show. Thanks again, and have a great week. Stay sharp.